I'm Kara O'Donnell, and this is County Board Wrap-Up, our monthly deep dive into the actions taken by the Arlington County Board at its monthly meeting, as well as hot topics around the community. Today we're joined, as always, by County Board Chair Katie Crystal. Katie, thanks very much for joining us.
A pleasure.
Today we're going to be talking about the County Manager's proposed capital improvement plan for fiscal year 2019 through 2028, rebuilding the county's only skate park, as well as long-term planning for 4 Mile Run Valley. So, Katie, let's get right into it. The county manager presented his proposed capital improvement plan at the May meeting. Let's talk about what is a capital improvement plan. Let's start there, and why is that a whole separate thing than we just went through the budget process?
Absolutely. So the capital improvement plan is our 10-year plan for infrastructure, basically. What we're going to build, what we're going to maintain, how we're going to maintain it, what we might be upgrading or replacing in the county. It's a way of planning for the funding and timing of our needs and priorities for these major investments, these capital investments, over a 10-year time horizon. Whereas our operating budget, we update every year for the expenditures we plan to make during that fiscal year.
Well, then why do we do the capital improvement plan for a 10-year period, and then we need to revise it every couple of years?
Absolutely. So we do revisit it on a biennial basis, as you were just alluding to, and it's a way of revisiting our priorities, of course. Projects move in and out, right? As projects are funded through bonds, they're completed, they're moved off the rolls of the capital improvement plan, and new things start getting added on in the back end. They might be things that we've realized are now starting to reach the end of their useful life, fire stations that are more than half a century old in some instances, or others as we start to look out into the longer forecast, which shifts up 2 years each cycle, we start to see more things that might need a new touch or a new facilities need entirely.
So it needs that kind of constant re-looking at it with a new lens
Exactly.
to find out. So what would you say with this most recent plan, what are the big ticket items, so to speak, the things that we're really going to prioritize?
Absolutely. So the manager proposed about $2.8 billion in investments over the next decade. The big pieces there, unsurprisingly, because they're the big pieces in our operating budget as well, are transportation, chiefly metro, and the public schools.
And what about in terms of the debt ceiling? Why do we need that to go along with this kind of
Great question. You hear this magical 10% number, right, which is a function of debt obligations in a given year relative to our overall expenditures. And it's a way that we actually signal to those who might be loaning the county money over the long term that we're making prudent financial decisions. And it's paid off over time. The county is one of the rare communities in America to have a AAA bond rating from all 3 of the major rating agencies.
So a triple A bond
You got
rating.
it, exactly. And it means that we do spend less money on financing our debt over the life of those debts, and it means that we are always eligible for good terms and for people who want to invest in our public infrastructure. It's not something every community can say, and it's really important to Arlington County.
Now, how does that then in turn affect the CIP, Capital Improvement Plan, itself?
It basically sets the box of what we can borrow, of what we can go to the bond market and request, and what we plan to finance. And so when we say there's not enough within the CIP to do X or Y, there are always more projects than we have financing for. That's the ceiling or the boundaries of the box that tell us what we can spend.
Now, as we've discussed here on County Board Rep in the past, this is a lean budget year. Has this then had any impact on the CIP, or are they apples and oranges?
No, they're very related, right? So again, the 10% is the debt service to overall expenditures. If the overall expenditures are lower because we've been taking in less revenue or our growth in revenue has been slower, then that means we have less debt available to us as well under that 10% ceiling. The other major constraint on this CIP is that metro funding deal that we talked about over the past couple of months while the General Assembly was in session. As I think we talked about in our April wrap-up, we got some disappointing news from the General Assembly. The governor had made a series of amendments that would have allowed us to finance that dedicated revenue source for metro with new revenue sources. The General Assembly, on a party line vote, rather specifically the House of Delegates, rejected those and basically funded metro in 2 ways. One, by taking money away from the major regional source of projects. We are feeling that now because we're less eligible for, there's less funding for which we can be eligible for things like the Crystal City and Ballston metro entrances. And the bill also obligated each of the metro jurisdictions to pay more in. For Arlington, that looks like between $100 to $110 million additional money over the 10-year life of the CIP. It's money we weren't planning on 2 years ago. And as you might imagine, if that box isn't growing, which it isn't, that money had to come from somewhere else. And so at the end of the day, we've had to scale back or in some cases defer even indefinitely other projects that were important priorities for the county.
So, but we have to kind of give and take because Metro is kind of still not completely certain at this point.
Well, that's exactly right, and it's a great point, Kara. It's not just that we're obligated to by the General Assembly, it's that having this dedicated revenue source is incredibly important for Metro's future. And as I was mentioning, so many of our transportation projects we wouldn't go forward with if there weren't a Metro already.
Anyway, yeah.
So it's a great point.
Okay, well, let's move on to the 4 Mile Run Valley and this policy framework that the board adopted at the May meeting. Why was a policy framework even needed for this particular area?
Absolutely. So this was an area that was relatively unplanned in the scope of things, as you know, in our major metro corridors and increasingly even outside of them, like Columbia Pike or now Lee Highway. We have significant plans that represent a lot of work and effort and visioning by the community. And then we seek to adjust our zoning tools and our land use policies to match what we want to achieve. That type of work hadn't touched 4 Mile Run. And this is an incredibly important area of the county. It's some of our last industrial zone land.
I was just going to say, it's kind of that old school, for lack of a better way of putting it, where you have the low-rise industrial buildings, warehouses, that kind of thing that you don't see elsewhere in the county.
You don't see elsewhere in the county, and not only do they provide critically important services, right, the car repairs, etc., it also has allowed for some real creativity to flourish in this part of the county. So we joke that it's our economic engine of the dog economy down in 4 Mile Run, right? Lots of pet wash areas, pet walking services, pet boarding, because those are things that happen in industrially zoned property.
And the Shirlington Dog Park
the
right there,
Shirlington
so it's
Dog
convenient.
Park itself, it's all very symbiotic. And so there was a real consensus, I think, on the part of those participating in that more than 2-year planning process that they wanted to keep some of that industrial character, that funkiness of 4 Mile Run. And another thing that made this policy framework unique is that it brought together an integrated planning effort. It's the first time the county has really brought forward the Department of Environmental Services, community planning, as well as Parks and Recreation to think holistically, both about the zoning and the character of the neighborhood in the corridor, but also what the major amenities would look like there. We spent a lot of time talking about the Shirlington Dog Park, and by the time it reached the board, there were areas of consensus on nearly everything, with one notable exception, which was the future of Jenny Dean Park and the master plan there.
So what was decided then for the Jenny Dean Park? You said that was the controversial item.
That's right, and I made the joke. The number is very back in the envelope, but the whole area 4 Mile Run is about 90 acres, and I think this Jenny Dean Park is maybe about 10 or 12. And so, we had 75 acres, give or take, of compromise that everyone agreed on, right? But it came down to that
little piece,
that final area. There was general consensus, although not everyone was thrilled about it, that most of the amenities that were currently in the park would be replaced and upgraded. So the question became, how did they get placed, and where were they facing? And that also became a question of phasing. There are some targets for land acquisition in that park that we don't own yet. And so there's a vision for a phase 1 and phase 2. So it became a little bit of this question of what's important for us to achieve right away on what the county already owns, relative to what can be overachieved over time.
And there's a little bit of history that goes along with the park as well, correct?
That's absolutely correct. So Knock is an incredibly historic area in Arlington County. I'm fortunate to live just a neighborhood away in the Columbia Heights area. And Knock has been an historic African-American community in Arlington County. It's been home to some churches that have played a major role in the civil rights movement in Virginia and even in the nation. And it's home to many of our longstanding community members. In some parts of Knock, you're a newcomer if you've only been in your house for 1 or 2 generations. And so it really meant a lot to us to hear from the neighborhood. And we really candidly struggled a lot as board about trying to balance the need of a neighborhood in general, but especially a neighborhood that truly has been underserved in the county's history with the needs of the whole community with regard to this park. So it was a very real conversation, an earnest one, and I think at the end of the day, we're just incredibly grateful to those who earnestly share their perspectives and engage throughout the process.
Now, so we have the framework plan. Now, how does that then go forward? Is that a gospel plan that moves forward over the next how many years, Or is this something that then incorporates other visions? How does that
There's
really work?
always a follow-on plan in Arlington County, right? There's always a follow-on plan, and in this case, there are going to be a few. The framework does provide a vision and a conceptual plan, but there's a lot more. There are a lot more details to be worked out. Whether it is the specifics of the transportation, there's some proposal to potentially restripe the existing right-of-way on 4 Mile Run Drive to create more parking opportunities for people using the park or using these other retail amenities. And that will require a little bit more hammering out to figure out exactly what will go where and when over the next year. There is more specific planning to be done on Jenny Dean Park itself, right? So we endorsed a framework for where roughly those different amenities would be replaced and upgraded. But there's a lot to be determined in terms of the landscaping, the design, what materials will be used, and really importantly, what kind of historical interpretation there'll be to make sure that the legacy of Jenny Sarepta Dean, for whom that park is named, is adequately captured. So those are just a couple of pieces. There'll also be more to do in terms of figuring out the specific tools we might pursue to create an arts district, which was a recommendation of the working group as well.
All right, we will stay tuned and see as things unfold. But we're going to take a short break now, and when we come back, we'll be joined by board member Christian Dorsey as well to talk about the board approving a contract to completely rebuild Arlington's only skate park. Stay with us. Welcome back to County Board Wrap-Up, our monthly look at the important actions the board takes at its public meetings. I'm your host, Kara O'Donnell, and today I'm talking with County Board Chair Katie Crystal, as well as now joined by Vice Chair Kristen Dorsey. Thank you both for joining us again here today. So for our viewers who don't know already, Arlington has a skate park, just one. And it's on Wilson Boulevard, and it's been there for almost 14 years.
Yeah.
I'm going to be perfectly honest and say I guess I never really paid attention that there was a skate park. I don't know, maybe it just hasn't been in use when I've happened to walk by, but it's very popular with both kids and adults. And at the May meeting, you awarded a contract for this park. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, so the Powhatan Skate Park is actually regionally known, and it's something that is fairly unique in terms of play infrastructure in communities. But ours is a place where you have, if you've watched the Olympics and you've seen the half pipes and the various elements, this is where skateboarders, inline skaters, BMX bike riders, they go to practice their skills, they go to just have fun. And the park itself, it's made of concrete, and concrete deteriorates. And so after 14 years, that's kind of like old age for a public amenity. It's time to replace it. And the vision to replace it is going to bring state-of-the-art elements to those enthusiasts. So it's really going to be something that's going to restore basic functionality, which has been lost. If you did take a close look, Kara, you'll see a lot of patched concrete, which is not really so safe.
Not ideal for skateboarding,
right?
especially, yes.
So, we're talking about something that's going to bring state-of-the-art surfacing materials that hopefully are going to give us a lot more longevity and make our dollars last a lot more. And this will, again, sort of be something that we get not just great usage from Arlingtonians of all ages, but people from all across the region.
Now, when you were looking at renovating this park, getting some new skin on it, shall we?
Yeah.
Did you talk to those who were using it? Did they give some input into the design or what they wanted to see in a new park?
Well, of course, as you were talking about with 4 Mile Run, of course we talked to our community. Even if we hadn't effectively gone out and done proactive outreach, they would have come to
told
us. And we heard from not just young people, surprisingly, lots of moms who had taken up skateboarding, inline skating, who came to us with all of the ways in which the park was not quite fulfilling its potential to meet their needs. And so I think with the new design, we're going to see a very thoughtful execution of what has really been community-centered feedback on how to not only situate the elements, but also how we can envision the park operating so that people who are extremely skilled and daring with their tricks and how they ride or how they skate, how that can also be compatible with those just learning, so that it's a place where everyone can be welcome.
Okay. Of all skill sets.
Absolutely, because one of the things that I heard that was really poignant to me was a mom who was introduced by her teenage son, and he was at an expert level, she was at a novice level, and then they brought along his younger sister, her daughter, who was at a beginner level. And that sort of informed a lot of the feedback for how they could all play at this space together at the same time, safely and in ways that fulfilled all their needs.
So what are going to be the big highlights of this new Powhatan skate park?
So we have the renderings online, and you can see, one, to the naked eye, you'll see all of the trick elements that are going to be in place, but they are different colors of concrete, different colors of surface, so that it's a lot easier for people to safely navigate them. And there are going to be amenities for people who are watching, people who are just at the beginner level, who have some easier elements. So it's going to just bring all of those cool things into one fairly compact space.
Okay, now is this kind of a trend we're seeing with county parks, less basic space and more that's designed for active recreation or specific activities? Is that something we're seeing more of?
Well, you know, I would say, Katie, we're trying to balance really everything.
Exactly, yeah.
You know, we had this extensive public engagement where we sought to plan our open spaces and to be very mindful of how our community likes to play and what are some of the best practices from elsewhere. So what we're seeing is this very intentional effort to make sure the casual users who just want to enjoy the outdoors are also served alongside people who have specific recreational needs. And this is just one example. This is very specific. You can't use this for much other
For
than
a baseball game.
Right.
It would be awkward.
That's right. So we're not going to have one of these in every neighborhood. We've only got one in the county, but that's okay, as long as we're providing across our whole inventory all of the different things that people will use and enjoy.
And I think actually, Kara, to your question, if anything, there's probably a little more of an emphasis these days on what Christian was alluding to, what we're calling casual use space. We've heard from a lot of residents it's not passive, right? People choose to use it in all kinds of active ways. But one of our residents has put this in such a compelling way to me, which is that we have to start recognizing that casual use space is not just the space that's left over when you've already fit in the other amenities. And you can start to see this reflected as we go in different park planning. You know, when we talk, for example, about those two options for how to balance the use of Jenny Dean Park that we were just talking about with 4 Mile Run, there was a real goal of trying to make sure there was contiguous open space, casual use space that wasn't programmed. And I think you'll start to see a greater emphasis of that. It's really a big theme that came out of our Public Spaces Master Plan update.
Well, we've come to the end of another County Board wrap-up. I hope you've enjoyed our chat with the County Board Chair, Katie Crystal, as well as Vice Chair Christian Dorsey about the key decisions the board took this month, decisions that affect you, your family, and our community. Remember, all county board meetings are open to the public and live streamed and archived on our website. That's arlingtonva.us. Just search County Board. And if you want to tell us what you think about these issues and more, visit the county website at topics.arlingtonva.us/engage. I'm Kara O'Donnell, and we'll see you next month right here on County Board Wrap Up.